Japanese soldiers expected the worst. They'd been told Americans would end them. But something completely different happened. One captured soldier couldn't believe what he saw when the guards approached. Another refused to eat for 3 days, thinking it was all a trick. And when they finally realized the truth about what they'd been told, everything they believed about their enemy shattered in an instant. What happened next changed how they saw the entire conflict. The year was 1944. Japanese soldiers were fighting across the Pacific. They believed one thing about their enemy. Americans were monsters. That's what their leaders told them, every single day. But then something happened, something nobody expected. When Japanese soldiers were captured, they waited for the worst. They'd been trained to never surrender, because surrender meant terrible things, pain, suffering, a fate worse than anything. One soldier remembered his final moments before capture. He closed his eyes. He said goodbye to his family in his mind. He thought this was the end. But when American soldiers approached him, something felt different. They didn't look angry. They didn't look cruel. What happened in the next few minutes would change everything he believed, not just about Americans, but about the entire conflict he'd been fighting, and what his own leaders had told him. The first captured soldier couldn't believe what he saw. American medics rushed toward him, not with weapons, but bandages, with medical supplies. He had wounds on his leg and arm. He expected them to leave him there, or worse. Instead, they started treating his injuries, gently, carefully, like he was one of their own. The soldier's hands were shaking, not from pain, from confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. Everything he'd been told was wrong. Another soldier nearby watched this happen. He'd been taught that Americans enjoyed making prisoners suffer, that they would mock them, hurt them, take revenge. But that's not what he saw. He saw soldiers giving water to the captured, speaking in calm voices, acting with respect. One Japanese prisoner later said something that shocked everyone, something about what he felt in that exact moment. But what he said wasn't just surprising, it revealed something much bigger. The captured soldiers were taken to a camp. On the way there, they sat in silence. Their minds were racing. They expected prison camps to be terrible places, dark, cold, filled with cruelty. That's what they'd been promised would happen. When they arrived, they couldn't process what they saw. The camp had buildings, clean ones. There were beds inside, real beds, not cages, not dirt floors, actual beds with blankets. The Japanese soldiers looked at each other. Something was very wrong, or very right. Guards opened the doors and told them to enter. The prisoners hesitated. Was this a trap? Would the kindness suddenly end? One older soldier named Takashi stepped forward first. His heart was pounding. He walked through the door and stopped. His mouth opened slightly. What he saw inside that building made him freeze completely, and what the American guards said to him next would haunt him for decades. Inside the building there were tables, and on those tables was food, real food, rice, vegetables, bread, meat. The Japanese soldiers stared. They hadn't seen this much food in months, even when they were fighting for their own side. Their rations had been tiny, sometimes nothing at all. An American officer walked in. He spoke through a translator. "You will eat 3 meals every day here. You are prisoners, but you will be treated fairly. That is our way." The Japanese soldiers didn't move. They didn't believe it. This had to be a trick, a test. One young soldier named Hiroaki refused to touch the food. For 3 full days, he sat and watched others eat. He thought the food might be poisoned, or that this kindness was temporary, that soon the real treatment would begin, the cruel treatment he'd been warned about. But on the 4th day, something happened that changed Hiroaki's mind forever.
On the 4th day, Hiro collapsed. His body gave out from not eating. He fell to the floor. American guards rushed over immediately. They called for a doctor. Within minutes, a medical officer arrived. He checked Hiro's condition. Then he did something unexpected. He sat beside Hiro and spoke through the translator. "Why won't you eat? Are you afraid?" Hiro looked up, weak and confused. He nodded slowly. The doctor smiled gently. "I understand. But I promise you, the food is safe. Here, I'll show you." The doctor took a piece of bread from Hero's tray, and he ate it himself, right in front of him. Then he took a bite of rice. He drank from the water cup. "See? It's okay. You're safe here. We just want you to survive and be healthy." Tears started forming in Hero's eyes, not from sadness, from something else entirely, something he never expected to feel as a prisoner. After that moment, Hero began to eat, slowly at first, then more confidently. Other prisoners watched him. They saw he was okay. They saw the guards treating him with patience, not anger, not violence, just basic human decency. Word spread through the camp quickly. The Americans weren't like the stories. They weren't monsters. They were just soldiers doing their job. And their job included following rules. Rules about treating prisoners with respect. Rules that shocked the Japanese soldiers completely. One prisoner named Kenji started talking to a guard through the translator. He asked a question that had been burning in his mind. "Why are you being kind to us? We were your enemy. We fought against you. Why don't you hate us?" The American guard looked at him for a moment. Then he said something that Kenji would remember for the rest of his life. Something that revealed the massive difference between the two sides. The guard said, "Because you're a human being. The conflict is between nations, not between men. You were following orders, just like I was. That doesn't make you evil. It makes you a soldier." Kenji stood there, speechless. He'd never heard anything like this before. In the Japanese military, surrender was considered shameful. Prisoners were seen as worthless, traitors, less than human. But here, in an American camp, he was being treated with dignity. It didn't make sense. Everything he'd been taught was turning upside down. Days turned into weeks. The prisoners started to notice more things. They were given soap to wash with, clean clothes, medical care when they got sick. They could even write letters home. Some couldn't believe it. Others started asking questions, hard questions about their own side. One prisoner started keeping a secret journal. In it, he wrote something that would later shock historians who found it. The prisoner's journal contained detailed observations. He wrote about the differences between what he'd been told and what he was experiencing. "We were taught Americans were devils, but they treat us better than our own officers did. They give us food. They give us rest. They don't hit us or yell at us constantly." This was a dangerous realization, because it meant his own leaders had lied to him for years about everything. The propaganda had painted Americans as cruel and heartless, but the reality was completely opposite, and that truth was painful to accept. Other prisoners began having similar thoughts. They started talking quietly among themselves, comparing their experiences, sharing their confusion. Some felt angry, not at the Americans, at their own commanders, at the system that had sent them to fight based on lies. But one prisoner had even a bigger question, a question that would lead to an answer nobody expected. The prisoner asked a translator during one of the camp sessions, "If Americans are this kind to enemies, how do they treat their own soldiers?" The translator smiled and explained. American soldiers had rights, protections, medical care, fair treatment. They weren't beaten for small mistakes. They weren't expected to choose death over surrender. This information spread through the camp like wildfire. The Japanese prisoners were stunned. Their own military system was built on harsh discipline, strict punishment, absolute obedience. Many had been hit by their own officers for minor errors. Some had watched fellow soldiers face terrible consequences for questioning orders. One older prisoner, named Ichiro, spoke up during a group discussion. "I have served for 15 years. I was always told our way was the honorable way, the strong way. But maybe strength isn't about being harsh. Maybe it's about being fair." His words hung in the air, and what happened next revealed just how deep the impact went.
Some prisoners started cooperating with American intelligence officers, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. They shared information about military positions, supply routes, strategic plans. This shocked American officials. They weren't used to this level of cooperation from Japanese prisoners. But the prisoners had their reasons. They'd seen the truth now. They understood that the conflict didn't have to be fought with lies and cruelty. Some felt betrayed by their own side. Others simply wanted the fighting to end, so families could be reunited, so the destruction could stop. One prisoner named Sato said something during an interview that American officers wrote down immediately. "I fought for my country. I would have given my life for it. But my country lied to me about who the enemy was. The real enemy wasn't the Americans." Those words carried enormous weight, because what Sato meant by the real enemy would later become clear to everyone. As months passed, something remarkable happened in the camps. Prisoners started learning English. Americans started learning basic Japanese. They played sports together. Baseball became popular. Card games, chess. The line between guard and prisoner began to blur in small ways, not in terms of security, but in terms of respect. One American guard later recalled, "We realized these weren't evil men. They were just men, caught in a terrible conflict. Many of them had families back home, kids they missed, wives they loved, just like us. It was hard to see them as enemies after a while." The prisoners noticed this too. They saw Americans laughing, showing photos of their families, talking about their homes, their dreams, their fears. The same things the Japanese soldiers cared about, the same humanity. One prisoner said it perfectly in his broken English. What he said became famous among the camp staff, and it summarized everything in just a few simple words. The prisoner said, "We are same. You and me, just different flag." Those words hit hard because they were true. The conflict had been between governments, between ideologies, between nations. But on the ground level, it was just men fighting men. All of them far from home, all of them scared, all of them hoping to survive. When the conflict finally ended, the camps began releasing prisoners. Many Japanese soldiers were sent back home. But something strange happened. Some didn't want to leave. They'd grown used to the fair treatment, the regular meals, the safety. Going back meant facing a destroyed homeland, shame for surrendering, uncertainty about the future. American officers had to convince some prisoners that it was safe to return, that they wouldn't be punished, that life would eventually get better. Many prisoners shook hands with their former guards as they left. Some even hugged them. But what happened years later revealed the lasting impact of their time in American camps. Decades after the conflict ended,
historians started interviewing former prisoners. They wanted to document their experiences. What they discovered was remarkable. Many of the prisoners had lived full lives, raised families, built careers, and they all said the same thing about their time in American camps. One former prisoner said, "I learned that enemies can show mercy, that strength doesn't require cruelty, that humanity exists even in difficult times." Others echoed similar thoughts. The experience had reshaped their understanding of honor, duty, and what it meant to be a soldier. Some former prisoners had even returned to America years later, as tourists, as businessmen, as friends. They visited the places where they had been held. They searched for the guards who treated them kindly. Some reunions happened. Tears were shared. Forgiveness was spoken. Healing occurred. One reunion in particular stood out, and what was said during it captured everything perfectly. In 1985, a former Japanese prisoner named Takeshi traveled to California. He was 72 years old. He'd been searching for a guard named Robert who'd shown him particular kindness during his time in the camp. After weeks of research, he found him. Robert was now 75, living in a quiet neighborhood, retired and peaceful. When they met, both men stood frozen for a moment. Then they embraced. Takeshi spoke through tears. "You saved my life, not just physically, but you saved my spirit. You showed me that good people exist on all sides, that humanity matters more than flags." Robert replied, "I was just doing what I thought was right. I'm glad you made it home. I'm glad you lived a good life." They spent the afternoon together, sharing stories, laughing, remembering difficult times that had somehow led to this beautiful moment. Their story became symbolic of something much larger, something the world needed to remember. The story of Japanese prisoners in American camps teaches us something important. Conflicts are fought between nations, but they're experienced by individuals, and how we treat those individuals matters. It matters during the conflict, and it matters long after. The Japanese prisoners who experienced kindness never forgot it. They carried those lessons home. They taught their children. They shared their stories. They proved that even in the darkest times, humanity can shine through, that mercy isn't weakness, that treating others with dignity, even enemies, can change hearts and minds. Today, historians consider the treatment of Japanese prisoners by Americans as one of the better examples of following international rules during difficult times. Not perfect, but notably better than many alternatives. And the impact rippled forward through generations, creating understanding where there could have been permanent hate. Because sometimes the strongest weapon isn't force, it's compassion. And that's what those Japanese prisoners discovered when they were treated kindly by the very enemy they'd been taught to fear. These testimonies reveal how humane treatment following Geneva Convention principles changed lives forever. American camps demonstrated that kindness could exist even during global conflict. Japanese POW experiences became powerful stories of reconciliation between former enemies. History shows us that positive accounts matter just as much as difficult ones. These non-violent stories remind us that humanity can prevail. Understanding these prisoner experiences helps us learn from the past and build better futures together.